everyone, this is Nick Murray. Welcome to TrailerSound. We got a little bit different look today. I'm going off my laptop. So, as with pretty much every episode of TrailerSound, we've had technical issues, and today the Ustream program on my desktop decided to not show any video. So we're going from my laptop today. So if anything goes weird, as always, just sit tight and we'll get it reconnected and stuff, and we'll edit out all that crap for YouTube. So we've got a really amazing guest today, guys. I do want to talk about his credits here real fast. He is a major player in the video game world, and if you know anything about video games over the past couple years, you know who Jeff Broadbent is. Recently, he's done music for games like Lego Legends of Chima, March of War, the Expendables 2 video game, I Am Alive, PlanetSide 2, Transformers Dark of the Moon. This is, everyone, Jeff Broadbent. Hey Jeff, how's it going?
Hey Nick, doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're joining us from Portland, Oregon, is that correct?
Yes, Portland, Oregon.
How's it up there? Is it nice and sunny, or is it kind of rainy up there still?
Well, it's finally getting sunny. The thing about Oregon is that we get sun 3 months out of the year. So we're pasty and white usually, and now we're trying to get our suntans. But yeah, it's finally warming up. I like that.
I know how that is. I grew up in Seattle, and I've got lots of family in Portland. So beautiful, totally beautiful. But you gotta make the most of it. Like pretty much July through September is your window of opportunity. So good place to make music though, because you get to spend a lot of time in the studio.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's an advantage of it. Yeah, when the outside is like Dagobah, it does it does tend to promote indoor activities. So yeah, that's a plus.
Yeah. Well, excellent. We're super excited to have you on the show. We're going to, later on in the show, so everyone who's watching, we're actually going to be premiering 2 of Jeff's tracks from his upcoming trailer music album with Position Music. So I know you've done some trailer stuff before, but this is a big opportunity for you to get the stuff out with Position. Position's been doing excellent stuff over the past couple years in the trailer world and made some big progress, or made quite a bit of noise in the trailer music world. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, and you guys will get to hear a couple of these tracks that are not yet released. Will be released in a week or two. So we're really excited to debut that whole sound of yours. Before we go into that, why don't you just tell us a little bit background about how you started in music, and then we'll get into kind of how you got into the whole game scene, library scene, how you approach those things different. But just give us the basic background. Did you grow up in Portland, and maybe your schooling, etc.?
Right. Yeah, actually, I grew up while I was a teenager in San Jose, California, and I went to school actually in California also. I went to school at UCLA. Prior to that, I did my undergraduate studies at Brigham Young University in Utah, and now I'm in Portland, Oregon. Basically, my start with music began with playing the piano and playing the saxophone. Those were my 2 main instruments. One of the things that got me into composition was I studied jazz piano. I started maybe around age 16, and that really got me into improvisation and understanding the theory of the music, which is an important part of improvising. That's really what got me interested in composing, because I found that I had a real interest in the theory and the freedom that improvisation allows, and a natural extension to that for me was composing. So I studied classical composition. Yeah. I know that I know some other people have had similar kind of experiences like that with improvising. For me, that's how it got started. I knew that I really enjoyed composing because one of the things was in college, when I had my mandatory alto saxophone practice hours I had to log, I found myself naturally just doodling away on the piano. So it was I knew performance wasn't for me, because it was, simply put, it was a little too mechanical and for me restricting. But anyway, yeah, in school I studied classical composition, a lot of 20th century stuff actually at first, which to me is really helpful because it allowed me to think of music not just in terms of traditional melody and harmony, but also sound and texture. And I do work as a sound designer on occasion, so that helps a lot with that. And then at UCLA, I studied in their film scoring program and took a game music class there actually too that's put on, and I believe is still put on by a game composer named Lenny Moore. And he's a great teacher, and he really got me excited about video games. Chance Thomas, who's a video game composer actually also, who had visited my schools to give seminars, really got me interested in game music as well. So the culmination of those things is kind of what shaped my background.
Okay, so a lot of people, when they say they went to school for music, I hear two schools often. I hear Berklee College of Music. I hear UCLA or USC film scoring programs. Is one of those schools necessary, or do most universities offer composition or other music degrees that you can apply to this field? Is it really necessary that everyone goes to Berklee College of Music?
I would say definitely not. And the reason I would say that is that increasingly more and more schools are offering courses in the technology that's part of being a media composer, meaning using DAWs, recording, MIDI, things like that. I actually learned a great deal of that while I was at Brigham Young University, which again for me was not a film scoring program. I just spent a lot of time on my own using equipment that they had available there. And the funny thing was, by the time I got to the UCLA program, for me, the game music class was incredibly beneficial because it taught me things I hadn't heard of before, the format for games and so on. But as far as the orchestration chops, the composition chops, and even the technology, even at a more traditional upbringing like I had largely gained the background for that. So I think having a solid music base and composition is essential. If you look at the great composers historically, they all had a solid base and composition. Beyond that is the technical ability to learn the equipment and the sample libraries and the recording, etc. And I found that classes can be helpful for an intro for that, but a great deal of practice on your own is necessary to hone those skills, which generally, for me, was largely done on my own. And I guess beyond that, I think one of the advantages I do think the film scoring schools have is they'll teach you the nuts and bolts of scoring specifically to picture and or games. That's something I didn't get necessarily as much in a traditional school. Okay. Meaning they'll teach you how a music editor works with a composer. In the case of video games, how music layers are delivered for games and loops, etc. So yeah, but I'd say the most important thing is just a solid background in music, which can be gotten in a variety of avenues, and then the time you invest in your own to learn the technology and your own gear.
Okay, so that's interesting. Coming from you came from a musician background, playing saxophone and piano. I'm guessing hours and hours and days of practicing and performing, et cetera.
Right.
Is that the same type of skills you need to now cross over and be a composer, where it's being a composer and producer these days is pretty much the same thing? You're all of a sudden now you're a mix engineer, and now you're producing stuff, and now it's like, holy cow, like I thought I was just going to be a composer. So how...
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting. Right. I think that's changed. I think people who used to be, say, a mix engineer had a corner on that market, or say a producer, a record producer. They were so good at what they did because no one else knew what they were doing. And now you've got to know how to play an instrument, compose, write, produce, mix, everything. How do you make that transition? How do you accept the fact that, okay, I've done years practicing instruments and playing music, like I don't have the energy to learn, mixing and
Yeah,
producing.
I know.
How do you get into that and get to the point where you're
Yeah.
just as proficient as at that you can now present your music and your ideas in a professional format?
Yeah, that's a very good question. When I was at when I and I didn't graduate from school too long ago. I graduated about 4.5 years ago from UCLA, but that was my exact question then, because then I realized, as you were saying, that the composer nowadays needs to be a mixer, and the mixes need to sound good. And depending on the budget, you may be doing it all in the box via samples. You may be playing in some of your own instruments. On occasion, I've played saxophone for some commercials, which is a little weird because that's not done very often. And I play guitar and on occasion for video game projects and other things. Yes, I would say that now I spend much less time practicing instruments. If ever I play, it's really just for fun on my own.
Right.
The skill of mixing, I think the only way to develop it is to continually be composing and mixing your own mixes. All along, I was kind of doing that because as I was composing on my own in school and even before I went to college, I had basic DAW programs that I would compose into and mix. So all along, since I was a teenager, I was pretty familiar with MIDI and those kind of things.
Okay.
But I'd say that, the mixing is a real critical one. And I think if you have some educational background in engineering, which I don't, which could have been more of a help, that can be helpful. I think another thing with mixing is, again, a lot of it is just the hours of practice. Whenever I mix something, I'll constantly be A-Bing it to what I think is a solid mix, so I have a standard to shoot for. I think that's really important because while composition often takes on a more creative route, mixing has certain standard levels and certain quality control checks, if you want to call it that. So one of the things that I've found invaluable is knowing what a good mix sounds like and really fine-tuning my ears to that. But yeah, it's definitely something I'm constantly trying to work on, the mixing chops. And I think the only way to do it is to have good standards to shoot for and just to put in the hours. It takes a long time. If I compare my mixes now to my mixes even 4 years ago, there's a definite difference, and I hope to continue to improve on it.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking right before we went live about that, and about just even when I hear stuff I did a year ago or something, it's embarrassing. It's interesting that you can progress at that rate, but I think that keeps us going. It's like, always learning new stuff and always getting better, and that's the same with any field. That's not unique to this, but. So for your extensive work in video games, is it mostly MIDI production, or do these games have the budgets to then go hire full orchestras? I've got a couple pictures here of you. I think it was was it on PlanetSide?
Yeah, PlanetSide.
Let's see if I can pull one of them up here. So here's a picture of Jeff. Looks like you're at Bastyr University. Is that correct?
Yes, that's where we recorded the strings and the brass for PlanetSide.
We've got one more here. Yeah, so that's awesome. How is that? I guess just go back to my original question. Do you normally get to record full orchestras, or is that a rare thing in the game world?
For me, I've done more in the box stuff than live orchestra stuff because it's always a function of the budget of the game. Generally with games, if they have a budget for live orchestra, they will know that from the get-go, and they'll have planned it in accordance with their marketing budget and all other aspects of production.
So that's a different budget than, say, your budget? They don't just give you one sum and then you say, if you're going to record, go do it? That's a different thing.
Yeah, correct. It's definitely a different thing. In games, if they have a budget for live orchestra, it's definitely separate. It's not coming out of the composer's pocket. It's separate from the composer fee. And often they'll have if you're using additional mixer or an orchestrator like we did in PlanetSide, also they'll have separate budgets allocated for those individuals also.
Okay.
I have done I Am Alive, which was a Ubisoft game that I did, which was a downloadable game, which had a smaller budget. I did use a live vocalist on the main title cue for that, and that's an example of a smaller budget project where I may bring in instrumentalists on my own to record to fit in with it.
Right, and you just upfront that because it's $100 or something to have them.
Yeah. Generally, though on occasion, I even when I record single instrumentalists myself, at times I will ask for a separate budget for that, and they'll be happy to do that. But I would say it's hard to put a number on how many games are produced with live orchestra because there's so many games now. There's so many. The way the game market is changing is that there's becoming more indie games and smaller mid-tier games and less really big budget games. There are still really big budget games, but I believe the number of them being produced is smaller, but the number of mid-tier games being produced is larger than in the past. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I perceive. And due to that, I think live orchestra budgets, they're definitely not on every game you'll work on. I'm working on a Electronic Arts game right now called Dawngate, which is a fantasy-based online game. We're considering doing live orchestra at some point, depending on how well the game does after it launches, but we basically ran the numbers for the cost of doing it now and determined it would be better to not do it now. So, and this is the reason why the mixing skills are so paramount, because even the games that I've demoed on where they had a budget for live music, you're still demoing based on your in the box creation, and the music as it's getting approved is still being done via the samples also.
So do you approach writing differently for live versus MIDI? So, if you're doing MIDI, you can just layer up stuff. If you're playing chords with strings, it's like you have 500 string players versus working, preparing for a live session and considering mixing in mind for that. Do you approach it differently from a compositional standpoint?
Yeah, I definitely do. And the reason for that is that even though the samples have progressed a lot, still certain things in the orchestra are more sample friendly than others. That's why you know this already, but I'll say it for the viewers also. If you watch television music, which is done via samples most of the time, you'll for the string section, for example, you'll continually hear marcato strings or the Hans Zimmer style. You'll continually hear big string pads, but often you won't hear a lot of intricate string lines that have a lot of movement in them. Say like a John Williams thing where the strings are running up, down, left, and right. So that's an example of that. If you're composing all in the box, I think definitely you need to take that in mind because it needs to sound good to the end listener. And to me, the final product is always the mix. Is
sounding good the same as sounding real, and does it matter?
No, I don't think it matters. And the reason for that is even in PlanetSide 2, we blended a little bit of the live strings with the sampled strings because sometimes it just makes it sound fuller. The audience today is accustomed to that sound. If you watch the blockbuster action films in the theaters, very often they're blended with them as well. You can hear it because it sounds bigger than an actual orchestra in person does. And I would say because that's kind of the audience expectation now, that's certainly something that's fine to do. It's not the same as producing a classical album of Beethoven music or whatever, which will have a very different sound also.
And I think that's interesting. Like, we as composers in the film, TV, game world, etc., we're doing orchestral music, but it's not the same as classical music. It's using an orchestra for modern music. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I love the classic scores too. All the time, I'll study and analyze scores because it's a way for me to keep my chops fresh. But you're right in that it's absolutely different. I mean, especially as the music continues to progress to more of a hybrid route, meaning the orchestra is an element of it, but you'll have all kinds of synths and all kinds of percussions, etc. Yeah, it's definitely a different approach.
So we've got a question here from Adam Hepworth. Thank you so much, Adam, for emailing this in. He's actually participated in a few of our episodes. And before I ask this, I guess I will say, anyone, please feel free to go ahead and start typing in questions on the Ustream social stream feed right to the right of the video feed, or on Twitter at TrailerSound, and we'll start diving into your guys' questions for Jeff. So Adam has a question that's kind of along the same lines as we're talking about here. He says, for trailer music, do you approach it in the same way as scoring games like PlanetSide 2? Do you have an idea from the outset, or say, write a piece like Dark Knight, or have an idea of a film or picture to go from? So do you approach it the same way as a game score, kind of?
Yeah, I'd say for that, definitely not. And the reason is that and I can say a real world example for this. I did for position music. I recently created another demo piece for them for something entirely different than what we'll hear today. But his reply to me, and it's good feedback, was, "This sounds like game music, but not trailer music." Yeah. So, and the difference is that
the untrained ear.
Right. The difference is, let's say the main theme of a game will be generally more flowing and than trailer music. Trailer music is designed to have picture created around it. Often, some trailer editors have told me they'll take the music and make the video to fit the music. So that doesn't always happen, but sometimes. And so when you're composing a piece of trailer music, first of all, it needs to ramp up to generally to the extreme at the end, because that's the form of a trailer. The second thing is that trailer music needs edit points in it. It needs points where the music will build and then stop, and there'll be a moment of silence or a breakdown or something like that. It's almost a fragmented approach to composition, because it needs to be that way based on the way trailers are made. A very clear intro, a clear motif that builds and builds and ramps up, then perhaps an outro at the end with edit points in the middle. Whereas when I'm composing a main theme for a game, it's all about the theme. I'm not concerned at all with edit points and so on. And often game music doesn't necessarily get as big or as ramped up as trailer music does either.
Yeah.
And another interesting. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. It just paused there for a second. I thought you stopped. Go ahead.
Okay. One other interesting compositional thing is that trailer music, I think the good trailer tracks are often composed with a very small motif that can be built upon. It's kind of a musical hook. Mm-hmm. Whereas game music, the themes will often be broader. There'll often be longer, hummable melodies as opposed to small melodic motifs. Right. So that to me is another big difference.
That's interesting that you talk about that, because as listening to your music, that's something I've definitely noticed about your style, is when you listen to your game music, and I haven't listened to all of it, but I hear a lot of soaring horn melodies or really thematic melodies, I guess, as opposed to the trailer stuff really is like establish a hook, then build it. And
right,
trailer music isn't for everyone for that sense, because a lot of people think it's kind of repetitive and it's just kind of formulaic. So talk about the balance in your workflow. Do you like doing the bombastic trailer stuff sometimes, and then be able to be more maybe expressive and thematic and melodic and game stuff, or am I making up stuff?
No, I definitely like doing both of them. One of the things that initially I liked about trailer music a lot was just the size requirements of it, meaning it would be required to have very great deal of strings, brass percussion, and other things. I think any musical genre, be it trailers or games or anything else, can be kind of a musical exercise. I mean, to me, trailer music is an exercise in motivic development. The small motifs. The reason why it needs to be a small motif is because the people are only going to see the trailer once,
Yeah.
generally speaking. And so the motif needs to be small in order for it to actually repeat enough throughout the 2-minute trailer or whatever that it becomes memorable. Whereas in a game or a movie, you have the whole hour or whatever to build upon the theme, etc. So, but at the same time, I like game music for the other reason that it does, to me, at times offer more compositional freedom as the themes are concerned, and the fact that while I like doing really big stuff, I like doing small stuff too.
Right.
It takes less time to do, for one thing, which is good. But yeah, so I definitely like both of them.
Well, in that sense, let's go ahead and take a listen to one of your cues here, because we've been talking a lot about orchestral stuff, and I was actually pleasantly surprised when you sent over this stuff for position that is quite sound design-ish and really modern, cool stuff. So with no orchestral elements. Let's pull up the picture here, the cover art, so people can see. It's called. Hold on, let me size it here so you guys can check this out. It's called Trailer Ammo. Enemy Below. I'm guessing trailer ammo is a category that they're going to be developing on.
Trailer ammo is a position music category that's more based around sound design elements.
Okay. And his album, Jeff's album, is called Enemy Below. So let's pull up a cue here, Jeff. We've got Ice Cream Man, which is an ironic title, or Paranormal Encounter. Right. Which one do you want to do first?
Let's do Ice Cream Man first, and I'll preface these with these are a little darker, a little weirder. So I thought they'd be fun to include, and that's why I included the Ice Cream Man one, because it's a little quirky also. But yeah, let's do that one first.
Okay, great. So here's Ice Cream Man from Jeff's album Enemy Below. All right, Jeff. Very cool. I really like the juxtaposition of kind of the creepy piano with the sound design stuff. It kind of brings it back to reality a little bit, but a twisted, kind of scary reality, I guess. So I'm not even going to ask you where you got the name for that one. That's just too scary.
I always make the names up when I'm done with them. So that just came to me as being a fun name for it. So.
Cool, very cool. What's your inspiration in starting a sound design cue? Because I know those can be, you're not working to picture, you're not working off of like a story idea. How do you come up with these unique sounds for this kind of stuff?
Right. When I worked on this album, I kind of wanted every cue to have a sonic identity. So, which is hard to do when you have to do 25 cues. But for the Ice Cream Man one, the sonic identity was kind of that piano or music box sound. This other one we'll listen to, Paranormal Encounters, was vocal samples that were processed a little. The way I always start any piece I compose, in it for game stuff too, I generally start with the form first, meaning I'll outline where the introduction is, and then the A section, I'll usually call it, or the B section, the A2 section, the ramp up section, etc. So I know the bird's eye blueprint of what I'm doing. After that, if it's sound design, I tend to get all my sounds together, meaning I'll find some cool percussion sounds, kind of assemble the palette, find some synth sounds or whatever, and then I just go from there. I like to have a general overview of the form and the sound before I start composing, though. So it has some kind of cohesion to it. I think that's to me, that's found a better way to do it, because artists do that too. They'll always start with the bird's eye view of the rough sketch and then fill it in and then detail it. So I try to do that composing too.
How do you make sound design cues musical as opposed to straight up sound design, like Foley type stuff? How do you make sure it still has a flow to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And I really thought about that a lot when I was working on these cues. To me, music has a few elements. Melody is one, harmony is another, rhythm is another, then sound, and then form. For sound design stuff, generally, not always, but generally, melody is out of the picture, and often harmony is, because it may just be in one tone center. There's not really a chord progression or anything. But you still have rhythm, sound to work with, and form to work with. So I think a big thing is rhythm. I mean, it has a definite time signature and 16th versus 8th notes and so on, different measure bar structure. Mm-hmm. So rhythm is a big one, whereas if you're just doing straight up sound design, here's my bigger section, those are increasingly more important, I think, in sound design cues.
Right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and play Paranormal Encounter. This one is really scary. I guess we'll play it first. We'll play it first and then talk about it, okay? So
yeah,
let me pull it up here. This is Paranormal Encounter. Nice work, excellent. Really, really creepy vocal stuff going on there, and I do want to thank Position Music too for giving us permission to play these today, especially since it's not released. So thank you to Position Music. So Jeff, tell us about those vocal sounds. Is that you in a microphone?
Not for this one actually. Okay. I have a big sound effects library because I do sound design for video games too. So these were actually samples that I processed additionally. Though on other cues for this album, there were weird cues where I would record myself breathing real fast into the mic in rhythm, kind of like a panting dog sound, or things like that.
When you don't want anyone to walk into the room, right?
Exactly. Yeah, next time I'll have to give you video clips of me doing things like that, maybe.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, very creative stuff. I can't wait to see this stuff pop up on trailers. If this is any indication of the rest of the album, I'm sure it's going to be hugely successful. So, cool. Super exciting stuff. One thing I want to talk about, we kind of got into it, but why... talk a little bit about, as a composer, running your own career, why do so many composers get into independent projects, whether it be a movie or big projects like games, etc., and still do library music. Can you talk about that balance of things and why maybe a young composer or someone who's getting into it should get into library music or should stay away from it?
Right. I think it's different in everyone's case. For me, I always kind of did library stuff alongside games because for me, one of the helpful things of library music is often the deadlines are more flexible because the library people will understand that you have other things to work on, so they won't necessarily impose a hard deadline on you. I mean, you still need to get it done in a reasonable time frame, but it's really good for filling the gaps in when there's delays in other projects, which happens. Another thing I like about library music a lot is it's definitely an in into getting television placements, which can lead to back end royalties, which is a passive revenue stream, which is a good thing. And likewise, trailers getting credits for because the thing is the library companies not always, but often tend to be better connected than an individual composer is. So for that reason, they'll be able to find licensing avenues for your music better than you would be as a single person. Some of the things you need to be sure you're doing when you're doing library music is you have to have your objective of why you're doing it. Some libraries, granted, are better at placing things than others, so that's an important consideration. Another thing with library music is it depends, but oftentimes the payment structures are you'll be paid when and if the tracks sell, not necessarily up front, though sometimes up front. So that's something you have to factor into your overall business model, because obviously often payment is deferred, and for that reason, at least for me, I like to balance these things with other projects where the payment is up front. So those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Are you ASCAP or BMI? I know a lot of people, when they're getting into that side of things to look at royalties, don't know which performance royalty organization to join and if that even matters.
I'm ASCAP, and to be honest, I don't believe that it matters. I see all kinds of composers on all different levels being members of both. And I suppose people could have their arguments for which is better at tracking all the uses and so on, but I think because they're both the primary United States royalty PROs, I think going with either one is fine.
So does games give any back end, or is that do they give you a portion on sales numbers, or is it just upfront for that?
Right.
I've never done games, so I don't know how they're structured.
Right. Games can do a bonus based on SKU sales, meaning for online games, not so much, because there's not a physical item that's being sold. But yeah, at times in games, if you negotiate it into the contract that when X number of units sell, you receive a bonus, or if the game gets ported over to another system that was not originally intended for, there can be bonuses for that. But generally speaking, while those things can happen, generally speaking, game work is considered a buyout, meaning you're paid your composer fee, and other than those two potential things that I mentioned, there aren't back-end royalties, which is a great difference than film and TV things, where the royalties come from the airing of it on television.
Right. All right, enough boring stuff. Let's let's get into our quick fire round. So I'm gonna ask you some quick questions and just answer kind of the first thing that pops into your head. So let's talk about samples first. So working inside the box, go to brass sample library. Let's say for French horns.
Hollywood brass, East West. Everyone's going to say that probably, but that or Cinesamples. I mean, yeah.
Okay. What else? Strings.
Strings, I use a combination of 4. I use LA scoring strings, generally for the short marcato stuff. I use Hollywood strings for the legato melodies. I use Adagio, which is an 8-DO string series, and I use that in combination with LA scoring strings for the short stuff. And I use Symphobia for any kind of string pads where they're held out.
Okay.
Like, yeah, long
So
notes.
are you someone who layers stuff on top to kind of meld it all, or you pick one for
I do.
each situation?
I layer a little bit, but I don't tend to layer things in unison, meaning if I have a big violin melody, I'll have it over two octaves or maybe three if I had the violas. But I won't be layering another different string library on top of the one I'm already using.
Okay.
Maybe some people do that, but I don't do that. I think the mixing can become increasingly more difficult when you do that, and it might sound a bit unnatural also.
Okay.
So
Synth. What's your go-to synth these days?
I definitely don't have one go-to one. If I could only have one,
Yeah, your island.
I was yeah, if it was only one, I would say Omnisphere, and the reason is that it's so comprehensive and has so much in it. Beyond that, I really love the 8-DO libraries, Heaviosity stuff I like a lot. There's other ones I haven't tried that I'll get at some point, but all the Spectrasonic stuff, Trillion, and other things I like too.
Okay, MIDI choir.
Right now I use the Mars Venus one, which I believe is by Sound Iron, and I like the way it sounds a lot.
Cool.
I always compare with other stuff when it comes out, and to me this one really sounds good, so I like it a lot.
Yeah, I like that one too. I think it has a little bit more punch than the Requiem before that.
Yeah, definitely. Right.
Okay, so let's talk about guitar sounds. You a guitar player yourself?
I'm I'm a developing guitar player. I mentioned my other instrument was I can play decent enough to play simple rhythm parts, but I'm definitely not going to be doing solos or other things. Like, for example, on Planet Side 2, we hired a professional guitarist to do that.
I heard that on there.
On some game stuff, but generally it's more restricted to rhythm stuff. For guitars, for more ease of use, I use a variety of software amps. I have Guitar Rig, tons of Amplitude stuff. Pretty soon here, I'm probably going to be getting an Axe FX 2 unit, which is probably the best modeled guitar sounds on the market. The argument being, if you're a real guitar head, you may have tons and tons of amps, etc. Generally speaking, when I do guitars, it's in a hybrid context, meaning the guitar will be one part of a very large mix. It's not like your next rock album.
Right.
So the reason being, and especially if you're recording, modelers like the Axe FX 2 can be very helpful for that because they offer such a range of tweakability. I mean, unless you're going to go out and purchase 12 professional amps and cabs,
Right.
and all that other stuff, I'd say it's your next best option.
Okay, so
that's
that was a long, quick-fire answer, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, let's talk about a few plugin choices really quick. EQ. What's your go-to EQ plugin right now?
Either Ozone or Logic standard parametric or whatever it's called, EQ.
Yeah, the one that you just click and it pops up.
Yeah, that one.
It's easy, I know. I kind of wish you could program that when you click on that little window to any EQ of your choice. Then it'd be like easy to, have your favorite one pop up. But yeah, okay. Compression on lead vocals.
I haven't done too much lead vocal compression. Again, I would, in the very rare instance that I've done it, I would also say Logic's compressor. That's what I've used on the rare instance when I've done it.
Yeah. How about reverb? Reverb of choice.
Altiverb.
Okay. Cool. You passed. Nice.
Okay. Good.
All right, Jeff. Well, I think it's exciting. You got lots of good stuff coming up. I can't wait to hear the rest of the position stuff. Do you know if they're going to be popping on iTunes like some of their other albums, or is it going to be industry only?
I believe this one is industry only.
Okay.
So, I mean, just for the simple fact that not many people want to put an ice cream man on their on their iPod, I
Yeah.
guess.
All right. Well, we'll definitely look forward to seeing it on some trailers and TV spots for sure. Um,
Okay.
is there anything else, Jeff, that you want to say to your fans, or any shout outs to anyone?
Just I always I appreciate you for doing this interview. I like the fact that people have interest in the process behind the composing. I know when I was studying it, it was always something I liked to listen to. So it's great to give a little of my own experience or background in that. So yeah, thanks.
You're very welcome. We appreciate you coming on the show today. Where can people find you online? What's the best way to reach out to you or to hear your stuff?
It's just via my website, which is www.jeffbroadbent.com, and my email address is on the contact page of my website. So that's the best way to reach me.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been great getting to know you a little bit better and to hear your approach to all these different aspects of the music that you do. I guess we'll wrap it up here, everyone, and thank you for those who participated, and make sure to tune in 2 weeks from now. Next week is 4th of July, so we'll be taking that week off, and we'll be back on 2 weeks from now. So we'll see everyone then, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.